The sun set over the city of New York, casting a golden glow on the most anticipated wedding of the year. Isabel Walker, the girl who came from nothing, was about to marry Ethan Brooks, the heir to a multi-million-dollar empire. The world watched. The cameras clicked, and the guests held their breath. But just as she reached the altar, the unthinkable happened. Ethan, the man she trusted, the man she loved, turned to her and said the words no bride should ever hear. "I never loved you." The gasps from the crowd were deafening. Isabel stood there, frozen, heartbroken, as the man she thought was her soulmate walked away. What was the real reason behind his betrayal? And could she ever rebuild her life after such a devastating moment? On their wedding day, he said in front of everyone, "I never loved you." But what no one imagined was that 4 years later, they would meet again. And he would reveal the reason for that phrase. And that would change her life forever. Before starting the video, I invite you to subscribe to the channel to receive the best YouTube stories. In Santiago del Sol, where the elite live among candles and secrets, Isabel Walker was the symbol of hope. Raised by her grandmother in a modest house, orphaned from childhood, she grew up with needles in her fingers and dreams in her heart. And when Ethan Brooks entered her life, she believed fairy tales were real. Fernando was perfect, polite, protective, passionate. He made her coffee on Sunday mornings, complimented her dresses, cried when he heard her plans. Isadora loved him with everything she had. She never doubted him for a second. To the world, he was the most coveted heir in the city. To her, he was a man who saw her soul. But Fernando hid something, a weight, a silence between the sweet words, a secret that grew behind his charming smile. During the week of the wedding, he began to change. He arrived later, avoided long conversations. His eyes, once tender, seemed distant. And now she attributed it to nerves, to stress. She never imagined the reason was another. The day was grand. The sun was shining brightly. The flowers were perfect. The dress, embroidered by her own hand, seemed magical. But as she walked down the aisle, her heart overflowing, Fernando waited, with the empty gaze of someone who was no longer there. She smiled. He didn't. And no one, not even Isadora, imagined what he was about to say. The wedding was broadcast live on a celebrity channel. The streets of Sunnybrook were filled with curious onlookers, fans, and reporters. It was the event of the year. The marriage between the seamstress who had enchanted the elite and the heir to the Reyes dynasty. The hall was dazzling. Crystal chandeliers reflected the gold curtains. An aisle of white orchids led to the altar where Fernando was waiting for her. Isadora's grandmother, her eyes brimming with tears, proudly held her hand. "You did it, my daughter," she whispered. Eudora walked with her heart on fire. The dress she had sewn with her own hands seemed to float with every step. The guests smiled. The influencers commented on every detail. And she believed in love. Fernando waited for her with an indecipherable expression. When she reached him, he kissed her forehead with a rehearsed gesture. The cameras captured it. The audience applauded. But something was strange. His eyes were distant, cold, saying nothing. The ceremony begins. The judge asks if they want to exchange vows. And she smiles. He takes the handwritten papers. But before she can say a word, Fernando interrupts her. Takes a deep breath. Slowly releases her hands. And looking at her, but speaking to everyone, says, "I never loved you." Absolute silence. The grandmother stands up. Someone screams. A glass falls to the floor. Isadora doesn't understand. She thinks it's a joke. A mistake. But Fernando gives her a hard look. Takes 2 steps back. Then turns and walks down the aisle, under the astonished gaze of the elite. He's leaving his own wedding. She collapses right there, in front of hundreds of people. Cameras. Sly smiles. The video goes viral. The headlines explode. A bride abandoned at the altar by Fernando Reyes. The scandal of the year. But Isadora no longer reads anything. Disappears from the media, the city, the world, and swears she will never believe in pretty words again. The scandal stayed in the city. But Isadora didn't. With a suitcase, some fabrics, and a blank stare, she left Sunnybrook without telling anyone. She went to a small town on the edge of the interior, where the sky was bluer and the neighbors didn't read gossip columns. There, no one called her the humiliated bride. Only the girl from the workshop. She set up a small space at the back of her grandmother's house. A wooden table. An antique machine. Donated rolls of fabric. She began to do what she had known since she was a child, sewing. She sewed simple dresses for small weddings. She taught classes to curious girls, teaching them that a needle can save a life. And silently, she also stitched her own wounds. Her grandmother, now ill, was her only bond. They supported each other, laughed when they could, cried when no one was looking. And every night, Isadora secretly embroidered a dress that would never be worn. A ritual to remember who she was, and who she would never become. Her name still circulated online. Her story was told like an urban legend. But she didn't read, didn't see, didn't want to know. Love, she buried him along with the torn vows. Never again, she promised herself. I will never again love someone who uses pretty words to hide lies. And in that small town, amidst threads and scars, Isadora built a new silence. A silence that held a strength she didn't even know she had. For years have passed. Time changed Isadora's face. The wrinkles around her eyes didn't come with age, but with the tears she refused to shed. Her dresses now carried hand-embroidered stories. Each piece a memory, each stitch a new beginning. At the Artisan Design Fair in Willow Creek, she set up her stand with the calm of someone who no longer expects anything. The stand was simple, raw fabrics, floral embroidery, stamped labels. But her talent shone. She sold well. People admired her delicacy, her silent strength. She was just one talented woman among many, until the past arrived in a suit and tie. Fernando appeared in the halls, accompanied by executives, with a luxurious name tag hanging around his neck. Kings in Santiago fashion with a purpose. Isadora froze. He saw her. Amy stopped between them. His eyes widened in surprise. Hers widened. Her heart was beating like an uncontrolled drum, but not from love, from trauma. She grabbed her things, tried to flee like someone escaping a fire, but cruel and precise fate crossed their paths once more. Isadora called her. She didn't answer. It's me, please. She stopped. She turned around, her gaze hard as stone. You don't have the right to say my name. Fernando swallowed. He was no longer the acclaimed man he had been before. There were marks on his face, guilt on his shoulders. But Isadora didn't want to know. She was no longer the bride at the altar, and he was no longer a dream. Although that reunion was only the beginning, because now he needed her. His brand was looking for local artisans to clean up its public image. And unwittingly, in trying to save his reputation, Fernando stepped into the territory of the woman he destroyed. The game changed, and this time Isadora wouldn't let him control the narrative. Fernando returned to the fair the next day, and the next, and the next, always with technical excuses, commercial proposals, and praise for her work. But Isadora knew he wanted more than a collaboration. He wanted redemption. Isadora, I've changed. I'm not interested. He tried to smile. She didn't. He was looking for the past. She only saw the present, and there was no room for illusions in it. On the third visit, Fernando found her alone, adjusting a wedding dress on a mannequin. The image was cruel. Do you still make wedding dresses? He asked with hesitation in his voice. Yes, for women who will be truly loved. She looked into his eyes for the first time, and there was no pain, only strength. Fernando stepped back, as if he'd received an invisible blow. The storyteller before him was no longer the young dreamer at the altar. She was a woman who faced public humiliation, flight, reconstruction, and survived. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She didn't beg for answers. He began to speak, stumbling over the words. I didn't know how much I hurt you. I was a coward. You weren't cruel and conscientious. The silence between them was a minefield. But there was something in her eyes that still disarmed him. It wasn't love. It was truth. And for the first time, Fernando found himself naked before her. He, the powerful, rich, acclaimed man, now reduced before a woman who didn't hate him, but didn't fear him either. Isadora didn't want revenge. She wanted distance. But something in her calm made him crumble inside. That night, Fernando returned to the hotel, and for the first time in 4 years, he cried. Not from nostalgia, but from something he'd been trying to stifle for too long. Guilt. It wasn't simple regret. It was the weight of an imposed choice he pretended he'd made for himself. And there, in front of the mirror, without cameras, without inheritance, without masks, he faced the question he always avoided. How long am I going to pretend that was just my decision? The game had changed, and now he was beginning to feel the weight of the silence he carried. The invitation to participate in a pilot project between luxury brands and local artisans brought Isadora and Fernando on the same trip, a conference in Santa Barbara, California. He suggested her participation. She accepted, not for him, but for her work. And because deep down, she knew that some truths could no longer be avoided. On the second day, after a meeting, they found themselves alone on a quiet terrace overlooking the mountains. The icy wind cut into their skin, but what truly hurt was the past between them. Fernando took a deep breath. His eyes were filled with tears. You deserve to know the truth. Isadora crossed her arms firmly, silent. He continued. The week of the wedding, my mother called me. She said if I married you, I would lose everything. That the image of you would be lost. The company's assets would be destroyed. That my grandfather's will was at stake. A pause. He swallowed. I hesitated, but she pressured me. She locked me in a room with lawyers' threats. I was afraid. Isadora closed her eyes. Each word was a knife. But she didn't cry. She didn't cry anymore. And then you chose to kill me inside rather than face your family. Fernando fell to his knees, for the first time without armor. I was weak and chose the most cowardly path. But I never, ever stopped loving you. Isadora looked at him like someone looking at a broken mirror. You destroyed who I was. He nodded silently. She knew it. She turned to leave, but before going down the stairs, she stopped. She touched the banister with trembling fingers. Thank you for telling me, but that doesn't erase what I went through. Alone. Fernando stood there alone on the terrace, watching her go down as if she were taking with her everything he had lost. She didn't forgive him, but for the first time, something inside her stirred. It wasn't love. It was the end of the weight she carried alone. And sometimes that's already a beginning. Fernando returned to Sunnybrook, a different place. For the first time, he looked at the Reyes family empire with clear eyes. Behind the expensive carpets and hardwood paneling, he found what had always been there. Manipulated contracts, arranged marriages, alliances forged out of convenience. The mark of tradition. It was a prison disguised as an inheritance. He confronted his mother, questioned old decisions, broke ties with shareholders, and rejected a multi-million-dollar merger with inhumane clauses. He lost privileges. But for the first time, he felt like he was coming into his own. Meanwhile, at another point on the map, Isadora received an unexpected email. Her collection, made with sustainable hand-embroidered fabrics inspired by the pain and triumph of invisible women, had been selected for an international fair in Lisbon. She didn't scream. She didn't jump for joy. She just closed her eyes and smiled. It's my moment, she whispered to herself. During the week of the event, fate acted silently. Fernando was invited as a panelist to represent a new generation of conscious entrepreneurs. Isadora as a guest designer. 2 names, 2 careers, 2 worlds that once collided now walk side by side. At the opening cocktail party, their eyes met. He was wearing the simplest suit he had worn in years. She was wearing a dress made by her own hands, the same one she had silently embroidered during the early mornings. Fernando approached slowly. You're radiant. I'm not alive, she replied. I'm more than I dreamed of 4 years ago. He didn't try to justify himself or ask for anything more. But in that instant, they both knew they were no longer victim and executioner. They were survivors of the same system. Only she was the one who suffered the most. And yet, she was rebuilding herself as a strong woman and was moving past it. On the morning of the international fair, Fernando faced the last wall he had left, his parents. He said he would leave the company, that he would renounce his family name as a shield, that he would no longer carry an inheritance made of impositions and fear. I'd rather start from scratch than remain a prisoner of all this. Gina Reyes, impassive, simply looked away. Rundo tried to threaten him, but this time Fernando backed down. Meanwhile, Isadora was getting ready backstage at the catwalk. She held the shoulders of girls who had once been like her, apprentices, seamstresses, anonymous women with magical hands. Her collection was there, not in display cases, but in scars transformed into art. Dresses made from fragments of stories, embroidered with words never spoken, colors inspired by the tears she hid for years. When the show began, the audience fell silent. It wasn't just fashion. It was memory in motion. At the end of the runway, Isadora appeared, not as a model or a star, but as a creator, as a woman, as a survivor. The audience gave her a standing ovation, and there in the front row, Fernando wept. He didn't make a fuss, didn't shout his love, just walked toward her after the final applause with his heart in his hands. The two stood face to face 4 years later, in the same silence that had once separated them. Annie, he said, his voice breaking, Today I see you, and I regret every day I didn't have the courage to do it. And she looked at him deeply. There was pain there, but also peace. He didn't respond with words, just took her hand for a moment, and then let go. Love doesn't always need to promise anything. Sometimes it just needs to find the right moment to exist. The hug didn't come as an explosion. It came as a cure. At the end of the event, when the runway lights had already gone out and the carpets were being picked up, Isadora and Fernando met in an empty hallway. Far from the flashing lights, far from the past. She took a deep breath. He said nothing. And then they hugged, without promises, without apologies, just the touch of two hearts that had once broken and now knew exactly where they had broken. Weeks later, he sent a message. There's a new cafe near the river. They serve homemade cheesebra. She was slow to reply, but she answered. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. In the cafe, they talked about everything and nothing. They laughed for the first time without pain. He talked about the social projects he wanted to start. She talked about a new collection inspired by roots. And between one cup and another, life began again. Then came the calls, the unexpected visits, the hands that sought each other little by little, without fear, without haste. Isabel's story teaches us that even though life can be cruel and the people we love may hurt us, nothing can destroy our ability to heal and the inner strength we all possess. Isabel faced public betrayal from Ethan. But instead of succumbing to despair, she chose to rise and rebuild her life from scratch. She didn't let her past control her. Instead, she found joy and freedom in creating a new path for herself. This story reminds us that change and growth don't always come from easy circumstances, but sometimes from the toughest challenges. Every wound, every pain can become a driving force to make us stronger. And a new story began, not like before, but better. Because true love isn't born at the altar. It's born when the pain is seen, when the truth is told, and when the masks finally fall. If this story touched your heart, give it a like, comment on which city you're watching from, and share it with your loved ones. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the soul.